Welcome to your first video for Number Sense 2, Module 2, Media Lesson 4B, Multiplying and Dividing Decimals. So in this first example, we're going to start by multiplying a whole number times a decimal. Let's read the directions. Rewrite the multiplication statements using copies of language and word names, then represent the decimal problems using the decimal grids. So we're starting with an example that doesn't have any decimals in it. They're two whole numbers. Remember, in copies of language, we'd say this is 3 copies of 4. Okay. So if we made 3 copies of 4, here's 1 copy of 4, 2 copies of 4, and 3 copies of 4. So each of these is a copy of 4, and the product is the combined amount altogether, which is a total of 12. So 3 copies of 4, or 3 times 4, is 12. Let's look at the next example. So this is 3 times 4/10. So in copies of language, we'd say 3 copies of 4/10. Okay, so remember it said to use copies of language and word names. So this numeric part, the digit, we're going to write as a number to save some space, but we want to write this as 4/10. That's our unit fraction. So notice we have 3 decimal grids here, and we want to make 3 copies of 4/10. So for tenths, we would use orange strips. So 4/10. There's 1 copy, 2 copies of 4/10, and finally our 3rd copy of 4/10. Now, just like we combine the 3 copies of 4 ones, we'll think of combining these 3 copies of 4/10 together. So we have 4, 8, 12 tenths. Now remember, we thought of a couple of ways to think about this. 12 tenths is 12 over 10, and as a decimal, we would write that as 1.2. Okay, so you could think about if we put these 4 into the first one and 2 of these into the first one, we'd have 1 whole, and we'd have 2 tenths left over. So 3 times 4/10 is 1 and 2 tenths. Here's another example. We have 3 times 4/100. So in copies of language, we'll write 3 copies of 4/100. So 4/100 in the decimal grid, we'd write that as 4 yellow squares. So here's 1 copy, 2 copies, and 3 copies of 4/100, excuse me. And if we put these all together, we have 4, 4, 4 gives us a total of 12/100. Now remember, as a fraction, we wrote that as 12 over 100, and as a decimal, that would be 0.12. Okay, and again, you could think if you move these over and combine them into one grid, 4 would go up to here, 2 would go up to here. We'd have 1 orange strip, 1 entire column with 2 yellow squares, so 1/10 and 2/100. So our product is 0.12 or 12/100. So let's think about the pattern. So we saw that 3 times 4 is 12. We saw that 3 times 4/10 is 1.2. And 3 times 4/100 is 0.12. So in each of these, you should look for your own patterns and pause if you need to. In each of these, we have the digits 1, 2. There were 12 of something. Okay, here it was 12 ones, here it was 12 tenths, and here it was 12 hundredths. And what changed is where the decimal ended up, or basically the place value, which was dependent on what we were taking 3 copies of. Okay, so when we're multiplying decimals times whole numbers, the pattern we see is we can multiply without considering the decimals, and then adjust the product's decimal based on the original numbers. So this is one pattern I see, and maybe you see others, and we're going to write this out in more detail later, but basically we see 3 and a 4, that's 12. It's going to be 12 tenths based on where this decimal is. 3 times 4 is 12, and it's going to be 12 hundredths based on where this decimal is.